Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Queries for Finding Transactions with Errors. This session was for the ConnectCarolina 2018 user conference. We're doing a re-record of it, but we're going to go over the whole session with you today. My name is Chris Minter. I work with ConnectCarolina Change Management. I've actually been working here at the university for about 10 years now. I was here with the first PeopleSoft thing we went live with, which was the campus solutions or the student side of things. I've been here through the finance go live and HR go live, so I've kind of dabbled in everything. I used to do a lot of training here on campus and actually used to teach this class. There is a class associated with this presentation, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more. But mainly now I do training and documentation stuff on the back end. But I will be your presenter today. What we're going to cover here is the typical reasons why your finance transactions get errors and get stuck, how to identify those transactions with the queries. So the whole purpose of the queries that we're going to talk about today is to find the transactions that have problems, help you identify them. What to do about the errors you find. So sometimes it's easy to run the query and find out what the errors are, but you want to know, well, what's the next step? What do I need to do with this? And then we'll talk about some of the resources that we have online that you can get, as well as the class I was talking about for figuring out these errors and working with the queries. So before we start digging into the whole queries bit here, I did want to talk about what happens to your transactions at month end and why these queries might be helpful for you. You might already realize some of this stuff already, but just in case you don't, here's a little refresher for you. So for campus journals, accounting services will delete them if they're not fully approved every month. So typically what will happen is you're going to get an email each month and it's going to say, hey, make sure all your journals are in and approved by such and such a date. It's not always exactly the end of the month. It kind of varies, so you have to watch out for this email. But one reason why you might want to run some of these queries are to identify which ones haven't been fully approved. And then you can take action on them to make sure they get approved before accounting services deletes them. So that's just for campus journals. Now vouchers, if you work with those, they're a completely different animal. The way vouchers work is you can start a voucher, say 5-6 days before the end of the month, and it's not going to get deleted necessarily at month end. It's more based upon a timer, if you will, of about 30 days. So if I start a campus voucher and I don't submit it or it doesn't get approved within 30 days, that's when those will automatically get deleted. So they can be deleted sort of any day of the month, depending on that timer, unlike campus journals, which are more geared towards the end of the month. Denied campus vouchers are a little bit different. They get deleted after 90 days. So if you submit a voucher and it gets denied, it'll sit there for almost 3 months there. But then it's going to go ahead, and then they're going to go ahead and delete that. And you don't really get much of a heads up on that. So you just kind of have to keep track of which vouchers you have out there. These queries will help you do that. These are different than PO vouchers. Campus vouchers and PO vouchers are different. Campus vouchers are obviously, they're created by people on campus, whereas PO vouchers or purchase order vouchers, they're created by the central office to pay off purchase orders. So they're both vouchers, but they have sort of different rules behind them, and if those sit out there too long, they're not going to get deleted. Now, requisitions and purchase orders themselves, requisitions are always going to be posted in the month they're processed in, which maybe is a little vague to you. What it really means is a rec and a purchase order can sit around all year. So if you put in a requisition in, say, July, it could sit for months and months and months. Nothing's going to really happen to it. It will get deleted at year end, and year end being like the end of the fiscal year. So it would get deleted on June 30th, and you wouldn't have it coming into July unless it's been turned into a PO and they roll it, and there's some other things around that. But from a month-to-month basis, they will go month to month. Purchase orders, same thing. They're posted in the month that they're processed in. So let's talk about the types of errors that that you can get on your transactions. If you've been working in Connect Carolina for any period of time, you've probably encountered some of these errors, but we're going to kind of formally go over sort of what you might run into depending on the kind of transaction that you're trying to get through. So one of the first categories of errors, and I'm kind of going sequentially in kind of the way the system processes things, the kind of errors you're going to hit. The first set of errors you're going to get, if you have them, is edit errors. And edit errors, the basic way of saying this is there's just something wrong with the way you filled it out. This happens when you put in some, you put in your chart fields, you put in some amounts, you put in dates on your voucher or your journal or whatever it happens to be, and then you go to save it. And what happens is when you save it in the background, there's an edit process where it's checking to make sure that the stuff you put in makes sense, like the dates are okay, the chart field string's all there, the chart field string parts go together. It's just checking to make sure you didn't key something in wrong. And it'll often give you an error. Sometimes when you're just working with it, you'll see it right off, like, oh, I forgot to put the account number in. But sometimes it's not so obvious. You might have to dig down and look at some of the error codes. But I'm going to show you some queries here in a minute that'll help you identify what the problems are, especially if you weren't the one working on the voucher. You can actually search, all the edit errors for a particular department or whatever it happens to be. Another big source of edit errors, and this is very common, are matching errors. And matching errors, examples of that, like you don't have any receipts put in the system. So let's say you bought something through a purchase order and you submitted the invoice, and they're trying to pay that invoice with a voucher at the central office. Well, if you haven't done the receiving in Connect Carolina, it results in a matching error, and that will hold your voucher up because you haven't technically told the system, yes, we received these materials. You've submitted the invoice, which is great, but this matching process wants to make sure everything it lines up. Same thing with an invoice not matching the line on a purchase order. Your invoice might say $300, but the purchase order says $200, and there's a matching problem. So that needs to be resolved before that voucher can actually go through. So that's another error that the edit errors queries that I'm going to talk about will find for you. So once you get past your edit errors, let's say there's no problems with that, there's still a budget checking process that will occur. So the budget checking process kind of occurs at different times, but say for like a campus voucher, we'll use that as an example. When I save my voucher and I submit it, what's going to happen is someone hopefully will approve your voucher. And once it gets approved, the system will automatically run a budget check on your voucher to make sure that the chart field strings that you chose actually have money in their budget. You could have a totally fine chart field string, but if there's no money on that chart field string, or there's not enough, you will get a budget error. So you'll get different kinds of errors on different kinds of transactions, but some of the typical ones are, you exceed the budget, and even if there's a tolerance, you're over the tolerance for that over budget. No one set up a budget for that chart field string, and it's required. The budget can be closed for the chart field string. That can happen with things like projects. Budget date out of bounds, same thing. It might be outside the commitment control dates or the KK dates for the project. So they're still closing up the project, but they're not letting any more transactions come through. That can give you a budget error. So that's your second set of errors, edit errors being first, and then budget errors. Then finally, we have some queries that will find transactions that haven't posted for any particular reason. Typically, I run these kind of queries last. Once I've made sure that there's no edit errors and there's no budget errors, if I run these, typically what it means is this thing hasn't been approved. That's usually what will hold things up from being posted. So if you ran these first, it's going to find everything. So we would find things with edit errors and budget errors and approval problems. But you might think, well, I'll run that first and it'll cover everything. The problem is the other queries have more detail about what the errors are. These are just going to say, hey, this thing hasn't posted. So these I find not to be as like forthcoming with information, if you will. They're not going to tell you a whole lot, whereas the other ones will. But if you've ruled out everything else, these will tell you a little bit more about why they haven't gone through. So without further ado, we're going to actually talk about the queries. So now we kind of know, what we're going to use the queries for. We're going to look for errors, and we're going to, we know what kind of errors we're looking for. So let's talk about the queries. So where are the queries? Well, they're in ConnectCarolina, so that's, it sounds pretty basic, but there's also InfoPort. We're not going into InfoPort for this. We're going to look in ConnectCarolina, and typically you're going to have most of these queries. I have found, and it kind of changes here and there, but some of the queries will require enhanced reporting access. So if you go to try to run one of these queries after this session, and you either don't find it or it somehow blocks you, you may need to put in a help ticket to sort of see, should I have this access or can I get it? But a lot of the queries, especially the ones I'm going over today, are available to all of campus. And you basically get the query viewer once you have any kind of finance access. So if you have access to do vouchers or purchase recs or anything, you'll have query viewer. And the little orange box that I've highlighted on the screen, you'll see that list after you click that big finance button in ConnectCarolina. If you look down the left-hand side of the screen, there's those huge buttons. It gets you to the work center and some other places. The query viewer is where we want to go. So just to show you the queries just a little bit, I just want to kind of give you an idea of what they look like and sort of how they're categorized. They're kind of a little bit like, whoa, these look serious. They're not the friendliest looking names, but there are some similarities. You'll see they all begin with NC, and then they've got underscores and some kind of code. So like the very first one you see there under purchase requisitions, I've seen these a million times, so they make sense to me, but the first time I saw them, I was like, what are you talking about? But I can see, NC, EP means ePro, REQ means rec, and then of course status. So that's going to tell you the status of your recs. You can see for purchase orders, you've got PO edit errors, KK errors. KK is actually, I do a whole presentation on this. There's another one you can look up. But KK stands for commitment control, and that just means budget. So when you see KK, budget, and so on and so forth. You can, excuse me, you can kind of see what these different queries do. Don't worry about it. We've actually got a whole guide, and I've got a cheat sheet that I'm going to show you. And you can get those all on CC Info. You can just sort of Google them on CC Info and get those. Plus, we hand them out in the class should you decide to take our formal class on this. So back into ConnectCarolina, essentially, once you follow that link that I showed you for the query viewer, you're not really given a whole lot of information here. You're going to have a search box, and then you're going to have to type in what the query is that you want. So it does help to have one of these references that I've been talking about, and I'll show you again where to find these. But to have a cheat sheet of the queries really helps. You can see in my particular case, I went ahead and typed in a query name here. It's long, NCAP edit errors vouchers department. And it's going to find any vouchers in my department or any department I search on. Show me all the vouchers that have those edit errors that I was talking about. So there's some problem with, there's some problem with the dates or the chart field string, and there's a matching error. You're going to type all that in, and then you're going to click the search button. Now, what will happen is, provided that you typed in the name correctly, let me tell you that you have to type it in exactly as. It's not very good at finding close matches. The query will show up in your search results, so I can see down below where I search for the query up here, I can see there's my query that it found, and it even gives me a description, voucher edit errors by department. So that's the query that I actually want. So once I find it, I probably want to go ahead and make it a favorite because these aren't, the most fun things to type in. So at the very end of the line beside the query, so this is the query that I found, there's a favorite a favorite link right here. If I click that, what it does is it actually creates a sort of grid right below the query that it just found called My Favorite Queries, and it's going to list it there. So what's nice is once you've hunted down one of these queries, if you favorite it, then next time you come to this screen, you'll see a list of your favorite queries. So honestly, you really don't ever have to type that in again unless somehow you lose your favorites or you delete them or something. But those will be available to you. So it's really easy to run a query, or at least to start the process of running a query. There's different ways of opening it. I'm going to go over both of them, but the sort of the fast, easy way is to click this link where it says HTML over here. HTML just means I want you to run it in a page in my browser. So I'm not planning on downloading this or anything. I just want you to go ahead and run it. And then what I have to do to get the query to run is I have to fill out some criteria fields. And there's a couple little things to look out for here. One is you have to fill out all the boxes. So in this particular query, it's asking me for two things. It wants to know my business unit, and it wants to know my department. So I used a fake department there. There's no department that has that many 8s in it, but I used a fake one, and I typed in UNCCH, which is for most people their business unit. If you don't know yours and it's not UNCCH, you'll just need to check with someone in your department. One kind of annoying thing is it doesn't have any lookups, so there's no little eyeglass over here to choose things from, at least on this query. Now some queries do, some queries don't. It's unfortunate that they're not consistent that way, but in this particular query, you do need to know exactly what things to put in. If you leave one blank, it won't run the query. It's like you think like, oh, I'll just leave the department blank and it'll find all departments. It really won't. Actually, if I wanted to find all departments, I'd put a % sign there, which I'll talk about in a minute, which is a wildcard character. But in this case, I'm going to search on this fake department of all 8s. So once I click that View Results button, which is right below the department number, I will get back a screen that will show me the results that it found. Now, it may not find any results. If it doesn't find any results, that's a good thing. That means for that department, there are no vouchers out there with edit errors. Now, they could have other problems, but at least, well, there's nothing wrong with the matching. There's nothing wrong with the chart field strings. I will tell you that it'll bring back a lot of different columns, and some of them are kind of like, whoa, I don't even know what this is called, and what is this? It looks a little intimidating, but I find that if you kind of focus on the basic information, you don't really have to wade through as much as you think. We do have a guide, like I said, that has all this stuff talked about in detail, like what every single column means. But in this case, I can tell you that, when I look at this, I can see, all right, here's the voucher IDs. So that tells me right away, if I just wanted to go find the voucher, I could go to the voucher screen and look it up. It also tells me in column B here, it gives me the origin. So the origin is just where the voucher came from. And the two big ones you're going to see are DIS and CMP. DIS tells me it's from disbursement services, and it's probably they're trying to pay a purchase order with a voucher. Whereas if I see CMP or campus, that tells me it's a campus voucher. So that can kind of help me know where did this thing come from and who do I need to contact. It'll have codes here like AP match, 100, 100, 100, 270. You don't need to know those names. We actually have a document that talks about this, but I can just look in this other column where it says MSG Parm 3, which don't worry about why that's called that. But I can see like, oh, no receipts found. That means I need to do some receiving on this. This one says line amount not equal to receiving line amount with the PO amount total. That just basically means, what was received doesn't equal what was on the purchase order. So that's a matching problem, obviously. And so on and so forth. Then I come down here and I can see, here's my department number, I put onion, 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 onion here. This would be some real onion for somebody. So if you really had no idea what was going on, or like, why is that voucher coming through my department? Who did that? I could contact the person by finding out their onion. I can see the invoice that was associated with it, the date, a PO number if there's an associated PO with that. I can find out a lot of information just by looking at this. So like I said, we have a whole guide that will describe all the fields, but if you kind of just look at the basic stuff, you can find out a lot. And you may just see that the voucher number's on there and just go find the voucher yourself. You just want to make sure that it's a campus voucher if you think you're going to fix it yourself, because the PO vouchers would have to be fixed by someone in the central office. So as I said, we do have a quick reference card for the voucher matching and errors. This is probably a little small, but I can see on this, it shows you how to run this query that I just showed you. This is a very common query people run. And I can see the errors, what the description of those errors, and it's actually got some suggested resolutions for that. Obviously, if none of that works for you, excuse me, you can always call like the help desk or something, or maybe talk with someone in your department, excuse me, to see if there's something else you can do about it. But hopefully from this you might be able to resolve the error yourself and see what you can do about it. So another query that I'm going to run, I'm going to kind of do two things at once. I'm going to show you a different query. One's for requisitions, but I'm also going to show you how to run it to Excel. And running it to Excel is handy because if I have a lot of results, I can obviously manipulate the data, save things, cut things, do more to it. Perhaps I want to make a report for somebody. So you start out the same way. And, what I did is I went back to the query viewer screen and I searched on this rec query, NCEP rec status. And that's exactly what it's going to give me. It's going to give me the status of a bunch of requisitions. But this time, when I run the query, instead of clicking HTML, I'm going to click Excel. And Excel is going to allow me to download it. So another reason I wanted to show you this particular query is this query has different search criteria. So you still put in the business unit, and lo and behold, there's the search icon here. So you could look up your business units, whereas the other query didn't happen to have that. And then you'll see there's a field for requester. Well, in this particular query, the requester would typically be somebody's onion. So if I just wanted to find all the requisitions that I had done personally, I might put in my onion. If it was someone else in my department, I'd put in their onion. What I've done here is I've put in a % sign. And what that's going to do is it's sort of saying all requesters. And I mentioned this earlier, a % sign is a wildcard character. So the reason I would probably do this in real life is, let's say I work in a really big department and there's like 15 people making purchases. What I could do is I could run it for every requester at the university, get it into Excel, and then filter down just for the 15 people in my department. So that's why I'm going this route, but you could also just put in somebody's onion there and do it that way. So once I put in that information and I click View Results, it's going to go ahead and download it into an Excel spreadsheet. And like I said, it's finding every single rec out there and giving you the status of it. So it's way more than you need. You can get thousands of lines depending on sort of what the dealio is with particular recs across campus. I can see, the basic information I'm seeing is what the rec ID is, what its status is it approved, is it open, is it denied, what's the budget on it, did it pass the budget check, is it in the sourcing process for a PO, who was the requester, these are all people's onions, and so on and so forth. So once I have it into Excel, then what I might want to do, and I'm not trying to teach everyone Excel in sort of one little session here, but if you have some basic Excel skills, if you're in Excel, what you can do is you can click the Data tab up across the top, and once you do that, you'll have this filter icon right here. So if I click Filter, what it'll automatically do is put drop downs beside all my header fields across the top of the page. And what that's going to allow me to do is actually shorten this list so I can see just the issues from my particular department. So what I'm doing in this particular example is I'm going to click the drop down here beside rec status to open up the filter. And what it's going to do is it's going to show me all the possible choices. So these are the different statuses that are showing up on here. So approved, denied, open, and pending approval. So if I want a particular status, okay, what I did was I chose pending approval, and now it's only showing things in the list that match that status. So I'm looking for ones that haven't been quite approved yet. But I'm still seeing everyone's across the university. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use two filters at once. I'm going to go over here and click the drop down by the requester, and I'm going to have a list of everybody's onions that are still available in my list. So what I would need to know is I would need to know what are the onions of the people in my department. So I would just unselect most of these and just check the boxes of the people that I want to see. So if I do that, what I'll get is a much shorter list. And I'm sorry, I had one slide too many. I'll get a much shorter list of people, and then I can still start working with those particular rec numbers and try to resolve what the problem is. So I might see, 2 or 3 recs once I filter this, and then I might try to talk to my approvers in my office and go, hey, there's some recs out there. These have been sitting out here for 2 weeks. We really need to get this purchased. Follow up with whoever. Maybe talk to the requester to see if they know anything of why this requisition's sitting out there, because you might be worried that it might get deleted if it sits out there for too long. Okay, the last one I wanted to talk about is I want to show you a budget error example. I'm not going to run another query, but I did want to show you what some of the budget errors would look like if I was to run something. So this particular query is finding budget errors on vouchers. So these have passed the editing check, so we know the chart field strings are good in terms of you keyed them in correctly, but the problem is they've got budget problems. So I can see, once again, the key information is here's the voucher ID, here's the amount. It'll give you some exception type number, which is like pretty vague. Really, you don't have to worry about the number. If you just look at the exception description column, it'll show you what the exception is. And budget date out of bounds, no budget exists, exceeds budget tolerance. These are all problems. So if it's out of bounds and it's a project, usually it means the project is closing out and they're not letting things go through. You'd have to contact OSR to see, can I still get this through? Can they open up the door for a minute so I can get this transaction through? If it says no budget exists, that means no one put a budget on the chart field string and it requires one. You may have to talk to one of your budget people or change the chart field string. It's, it kind of depends on each one of these, sort of what the situation is, but the nice thing about these queries is it does kind of scour all your vouchers or whatever a transaction you're looking for, and at least gives you an idea of what things have a problem, and then you can follow up either with the person who put them in, or if it's yourself, you can follow up with whoever you need to follow up with to get these through, depending on the type of problem that you've encountered. So just to show you, we do have a budget errors guide. I personally, I don't really use this very much, simply because I can see what the budget errors are in the query. But I will say that if you're kind of new to the whole game here, the nice thing it does is it does give you a column of what the possible solution is. Hey, my budget's over, my chart field string is over budget or is over tolerance. What should I do? Try to reduce the dollar amount, use a different chart field string, see if you can get more budget put on it, those kinds of things. But this is a handout that you can actually get off our CC Info website. I forgot about these little pop-ups. These just talk about what I was saying. If they're grants, they sometimes can be overwritten by the OSR office. If it's out of bounds, sometimes, the award can be, such and such, where they can override things or do some things. You would have to check with OSR on these. It really depends on the particular project and the rules that are around it. So what do I do now? I've found these errors. I've kind of alluded to this throughout the session, but my options are, use the information from the queries, and if you can do it yourself, find the transaction that has the problem and try to fix it. It could be something simple like, someone keyed in the wrong thing, or, oh yeah, I forgot we're supposed to do this. You can fix it. If it's a continuing project, the project ID might have changed. I'm not going to go into a lot of the details about this. This is for you project folks, but you can check with somebody in your department or look into Ramsey's, the Ramsey system, if that could help you. Or once again, you can just call the help desk. Maybe 962 can help you, or if it's a project-related thing specifically, you can send an email to the OSR help desk and ask them, the question, give them the information, hey, I've got such and such a voucher, it's getting this kind of error, is there something I can do about this? And they can direct you on what you need to do to fix that problem. There are a lot of resources that we have to help you learn the queries and how to use them. Besides this lovely webinar that I just gave you, we have an instructor-led class called Queries for Cleaning Up Transactions. It's taught by the finance team. I used to actually teach that class myself, so some of it's going to be similar to what I talked about. But the nice thing about that class is if you go, we do spend the end of the class time letting you go find your own transactions, and we'll help you run the queries for your real life stuff. So you can actually practice doing this before you go back to your desk. We have a guide, a full guide up on CC Info, preparing for year-end close. It's really year-end close, month-end close, just whenever you got some deadlines and you're trying to clean up your transactions. That guide will cover how to run the queries, a list of the queries, and what all the errors mean. We have a quick reference card of just the queries, so essentially it's this pretty little list of the queries just by name and what they do. That'll help you initially get those queries into the system and help you favorite them. I showed you the voucher matching and voucher matching and error troubleshooting query. That was the one with the AP match 100, those matching error codes. That's also up on CC Info, as well as the budget check exceptions QRC. So if you go into CC Info and you type in these things that I'm showing you, you should get some results that show you how to download these guides, and you can also sign up for the class on CC Info as well. So you really can't answer. I really can't answer any questions today because I'm doing a re-record of this. But this is normally where you would ask your questions. So if you do have any issues, like I said, contact the help desk if it's something you can do there. Otherwise, consider taking that class. I think that would be helpful for you. And good luck with your queries. That's the end of the session. Thanks, guys.